What does disclosure mean to you? When people say I want disclosure. And some people, by the way, say disclosure has occurred, in which case I say, man, you have such a disconnect from the people who are clamoring for more evidence. And it's just such a removal of yourself from the community that I feel like I don't know if we're speaking the same language when we say disclosure has occurred. But some people say that, and I'm sure they have their reasons.
Yeah, and I think the fact that people do have different perceptions of it means that we don't really know what it means. I mean, it means, I've always thought that term, I never quite, was on the disclosure wagon for all the years that term has been tossed around. I think people have different perceptions of what it means. But my perception is that it would mean an official statement, basically saying that we're not alone in whatever form that statement might take. An acknowledgement of the fact that, and some people think it means an acknowledgement of the fact that we've known about this since 1947. I don't know. It's not a term that I use or that I identify with very much. So it's really up to those who use that term to tell you what it means. Mm-hmm. I'm not using it, so I can't answer that.
I find it so tricky because even if the government did, quote unquote, disclose some fact or set of facts, it's not as if we would believe it. Even if they say, hey, we're not alone, we would say, well, prove it. Or we have bodies, show me. Or we don't have bodies, prove that. We don't believe you. You've lied to us so much. And further, even if they disclose, to me, like Lou mentioned, what we know is 10%, a partial truth can be a lie. In some sense, a partial disclosure is worse than no disclosure. There are several cases you can convince yourself of that telling a bit of a truth is much more misleading than saying nothing at all. It's just a tricky word for me, disclosure. To me, disclosure would be that the scientific community has access to some of the data or all of the data. It has to come through. Otherwise, it's just we're believing them.
Well, maybe disclosure will be when the Galileo project, led by Avi Loeb at Harvard, actually gets some data. Maybe it'll be the scientists that'll make it happen. People think of it as being up to the government to make it happen, but you just raise an interesting point. It's like, where are the scientists in this? And so the Galileo project is, they're going to set up their own means of capturing data that may disclose, may be able to be proven to be technology from somewhere else or an object from somewhere else. So we don't really know what it means, I think, and what form it might take. And maybe it's a process that happens in stages, which is why some people think it's already happened, because certain stages of it have happened. If step one was for the government to acknowledge that UFOs are real objects, they've done that, and they had not done that before, June of 21, or maybe they did it a little earlier, but certainly not before 2017. They had not acknowledged any of that. Since the close of Blue Book, it was like silence, and it was ignoring cases ignore events that happen, and if you can't ignore them, you make up something or you try to say something to make them go away. That has been the approach of the government in all those decades. So, even that is a level of disclosure. And maybe that's what people are talking about when they say it's already happened. Some people feel that the government documents released in the 1970s are disclosure, that basically they show that UFOs are real. And a lot of the documents from the 50s describe the perception that they were not from Earth, that they were interplanetary or whatever. So how do you define it? I think my perception has always been that the real disclosure people are talking about some massively dramatic official government statement that takes us to another level than where we've been so far. I don't know if that's going to happen. But, I think one thing people think about is if some of these witnesses who are coming forward now to Congress and to Arrow do come up with information about crashed objects or even debris that have been studied enough to prove that they're not from here. If that was ever to be released, perhaps that's a form of disclosure. Perhaps that's a form of proof. The question is, will that happen? And if they do report these things to Congress, first of all, Congress or Arrow or everybody involved with this investigation will have to track it down and make sure it's accurate and verified for themselves. Then the question becomes, do we make this public or not? What are the risks in doing that? Maybe it won't be made public, So But I think we get closer and closer to something like that happening the more time that passes. And a lot of people have expectations that this process that's underway now, and people are already involved with it, that maybe it will lead to something like that.
Let's jump off the speculative end and say, what would be some of the reasons that the government would not tell the citizens of something extraordinary occurring, other than wanting the technology so that they can outpace China or Russia? For instance, one reason would be panic, but what would be some other reasons?
Yeah, I mean, panic is a broad term, but it could be this sort of the destabilization of a society that might occur if people were really freaked out about it. I mean, I think that protecting technology is the number one. Protecting data that we don't want our adversaries to have. But number two, yeah, could be the impact on society. Number three could be concerns about, going after people who have, trying to convict people or going after people who have been involved with keeping the secret over so many years, trying to take them to court or whatever, kind of a vendetta going on. A lot of anger that we haven't been told sooner. It's loaded. And I think if something like this does come out, wouldn't be a bad idea to have some kind of amnesty for those from the past who were doing what they thought they needed to do and were told to do. But then, there's questions of crimes that may have been committed, of people who were harmed or even killed. To keep them quiet. I mean, it opens up such a can of worms.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's a way for something to come out in which the past is not dragged along with it, which I personally think would make a lot more sense and be cleaner, and for us to just focus on the present, what we know now, and not get bogged down in digging through the past and all the misdeeds that occurred for all kinds of complicated reasons. And I don't know, some people might not like me saying that, but I don't think it's productive personally. And then there could be other reasons. I mean, maybe the explanations that our government is withholding for us are much scarier than we might think, or there's an acknowledgement that has to be made of a lack of power that we might have, or our military might have, a lack of ability to control this phenomenon, to keep people safe. That, of course, is connected to what you're saying about panic, but the implications that it might have for the public can be complicated. And I mean, the fact that it's a gradual unfoldment probably makes a lot of sense. You don't want to shock people. You don't want to disrupt the structures that we have in society that, could be impacted by this. And some people believe, Kurt, that it really isn't going to be a big deal if this announcement were made. Some people believe, and if people high levels who have been involved with this thing for a long time, that it really won't be a big deal, and that most people just won't be that concerned about it. I mean, we have to remember that the people who are interested in this topic are a very small number. We kind of we're so involved that we think it's reality, it's life, right? But there's so many people that are just concerned about paying their bills and doing their jobs and raising their kids. And the question for them would be, well, yeah, that's kind of interesting, but it doesn't affect my life. And if it's not anything that I have to worry about or be scared of for me and my family, then I don't really care that much. And I'm just going to go about my life. It's not necessarily going to affect everyone. Some people don't have a curiosity about stuff either. They're just focused on their daily lives and they're struggling to survive every day. So it's so hard to predict how it might impact people, I think.
Tom DeLonge has intimated that it could be that the government is benevolent and that they're withholding for a positive reason, not something that is a power struggle or because they're trying to increase their influence and dominance and so on. I don't recall his reasoning for that, but do you remember? Do you know?
He made positive. What he's saying is that it's a good thing it's being withheld.
Yeah, that when we find out, we'll thank them. Something like that.
Could be. I mean, it could be. That's what I mean about if it's something frightening, maybe every element of that is not going to be helpful for people to know about. I mean, I can understand the thinking along those lines, right? What's it going to, do you want to terrify and depress everybody in the society when they learn about what's going on that they never even imagined was going on. I mean, it's a valid question. What good would it do?
Would you want to learn it, some truth, if it was terrifying and depressing?
I definitely do. I want to know the truth, and part of it is because I've been involved with this for a long time, and I already think things look pretty dire in the world anyway. So I always want to know the truth as much as possible, but that's not true for everyone. Maybe I'm like a masochist or something.
I think the majority of the people in the comments section agree with you. Have you read The Dark Forest or heard of The Remembrance of Earth's Past?
I haven't.
Okay, I'll give a 2-minute explanation. See, here's something that I think about frequently. I think that if you haven't found the bounds that could be revealed to you, such that you would want to rewind time and you would wish, oh my gosh, I wish I didn't know, I wish I didn't investigate, I wish I didn't fly too close to the sun. For instance, in AI, if the people who are behind the development of machine learning, like OpenAI people, can't see how their technology can go terribly, terribly wrong, if they haven't thought about that, then they shouldn't be developing it. And same with the people who are developing the nuclear bomb, like Richard Feynman and so on. He said, we were just having fun as physicists. And Einstein even said later, I wish I could burn my hands. I would never have signed off on this had I thought about the implications. So in The Dark Forest, it's a book series. It's called The Remembrance of Earth's Past. There's this Chinese scientist who found a way to communicate with other galaxies. And she says, respond to us if we're not alone, something like that. Someone answers back from a different galaxy and says, if you know what's good for you, do not send out any more messages. The universe is a hostile place. Anyway, I'm not going to go more into the book, but she doesn't listen and there are dire consequences. So what frightens you about this phenomenon?
I mean, I can't really say that I'm frightened personally. But I'm more, I don't know. I'm not totally comfortable responding to how would I respond to what frightens me. I mean, I think the reality is, and if you talk to someone like Jim Semivan or people that have actually encountered it, which I haven't, that it has complete power over us, right? It's way more advanced than we are. So it can do whatever it wants. And I'm not saying that it has done anything harmful, but it's something more advanced than we are. And we're not, so basically we're not at the top of the food chain, right? Even though we've always thought of ourselves as being at the top of the food chain. We are the most intelligent, advanced species on the planet Earth. And really that's not true. There's another species, there's another life form or entity or consciousness, non-human consciousness, however you want to describe it, that is more advanced than we are. And it's a shock in our thinking to come to terms with that. I don't think most people are aware of that, but that's reality. And so you can be afraid of it because you're not in control. And what if whatever this is decides that it doesn't want human beings around anymore. It wants to use the planet for something else. There's nothing we can do about it.
What keeps you up at night, Leslie?
Nothing except maybe the trucks on the street of New York City. I mean, no.